Hello and welcome again to this little video, an example of some of my writing. Maybe not the first poem that I ever wrote, but probably the first poem that I ever had published and that started this process off was something that I saw in the newspaper called Teardrops of Emotion, edited by those two people there. So if you see those two people, you may be famous. And it was a poem called The Case of the Flying Lollipop. You'll get the idea, and I'm sure if you're a preacher or if you've been sat in the church sometime that you've probably seen what we used to call the little game called Chuck-a-Chew-It happening from preacher to congregation, and this was one that went slightly wrong. I was in a Baptist church preaching at the time, and yeah, let's just say it went completely wrong. The Case of the Flying Lollipop. You've got to know that the person involved in this, called Christine, is was the wife of one of the 4 church elders. Keep that in mind. The Case of the Flying Lollipop. One day, whilst in church, a preacher led the way, with songs and hymns of fellowship and times to stop and pray. He thought he was doing rather well until he began to ask the congregation to think a little about a certain task. If God was an animal, what would he be, and why is this the case? He only wished to make them think as he pushed along the pace. But then things went awry, as they so often do, for sweeties were being thrown around. What was the man to do? He threw one to everyone who got a question right, and hit the target every time. So good was his sight. But then the horror of horrors struck, as the missile went slightly skew if it whistled through the air and landed with a biff. The landing spot was on the head of the leader's wife. Oh no, he thought to himself, I've got myself into strife. So, sorry, Christine, it was a slip and not a very good job. I can only add this little message. I was aiming for your gob.